And now we have a pageant today, which gives us Matthew's version, which has the kings bringing gifts to Bethlehem, following the star that they saw at its rising. Over the past 3 Sundays, we heard that Joseph saw an angel who in his dream told him that it was okay for him to marry Mary. Another angel warned Joseph in another dream to take his newborn and his new wife and flee to Egypt. And today the Magi are warned in another dream not to return to Herod, but to leave for their own country by another road. Matthew is the only gospel to speak about dreams in any form. And he's the only gospel that refers to these astrologers, shall we call them, who follow a star and find Jesus. The Magi followed a star which speaks to them of an event which they must travel far to witness. We don't know exactly what these wise men were. Matthew refers to them with the word magi, which we really have no idea what that was used for, except that it implies something about magic. And also they have something to do with the mysterious science of stars. Many Christians will tell you that psychics and astrologers are frauds or that they are evil. And I myself discourage people from seeking out advance notice about future events from tea leaves or from tarot cards. But what would Matthew say about such things? His unusual focus on dreams and a portentous star seems to surprise us about where we learn of these things. After reading Matthew's gospel, we would say that these dreams give accurate and even life-saving information. So we might wonder, is the Bible the only source of information that we get from God? There's a part of me that doesn't want to make the Bible overly complicated or inaccessible, that doesn't want to introduce ambiguity about the Bible to people who aren't looking for that much complexity. And yet I don't think it's my job to give people ready-made answers, nor do I want to misrepresent the Bible by glossing over its complexity, its diversity, its variety. I want to pass on the assurance and the comfort of the gospel, but I don't want to dumb it down. People would once think of pastors as having kind of an official role. They would think of them as kind of being religious referees. But rather than be pastor as umpire, I seek to be more of a spiritual coach, or at least a caregiver of the soul. And with that, I give people a question. Where has your journey taken you? Where have you seen God along the way? Where do you see God now as you look back? What unusual stars appeared to you that you followed and showed you a surprise? I want us to think about how we can tell our stories, each of our stories, in the language of the Bible, in the idiom of the Christian faith. And by this, I do not mean statements like, I've been blessed, I had a good career. Or I've been blessed, I had good parents. Or I've been blessed, I have a home and financial security. Or I'm blessed, my family is healthy. None of that represents the language of the Bible or the way in which we speak of life as a Christian. Those stories, the stories that we would see in the Bible, go more like, I lost my job, and then, and now, I look back. Those stories are stories like, my family suffered a great famine and lost members, and then something happened, and now something has happened. Or I lost a child 10 years ago, and since then, this is what I've seen. Or I was diagnosed with cancer, and from that time till now, I've learned, I've grown, I've experienced, I've changed. God has been there with me, and God has led me. Many people think the language of faith is I'm blessed because of good things in my life, and that's fine. But there has to be more than that. Because life is more than that. And because you have to think about where that leaves people who can't say that. People whose kids are disabled. People who have not had success. People who didn't have a good upbringing. The language of I've been blessed and here's the evidence of good things does not represent the language of the Bible. And is not going to sustain you in times of trouble. It is going to be insensitive to people who are going to feel left behind, and it does not represent the life or the message of Jesus. I really hesitate to make people rethink what they think they know about the Bible by pointing out that the Bible in some instances seems to validate the interpretation of dreams, or that Matthew wants us to know about how Gentiles were mysteriously brought to Bethlehem, but whether or not the Bible is the only source of information from God, or a source that gives us a simple version of information about God, there is in it always a lesson for us. Whether or not that's true, there is in all Scripture a lesson. We read the Bible not for verifiable facts or to settle an argument. We read the Bible and then we pause. And we ask ourselves, okay, this is the story. What is God telling us? What is God telling me? And what would we do now? The gospel reaches out to people who are worried, who are hurting, who are confused, to give them some assurance, to show them how God has shared in it with us. But it should not be seen as giving false hope or easy solutions. At my ordination, I was instructed, as it's there in the service, as it's set out, not to give false security or illusory hope. I don't think it helps anyone to have an immature faith that leads them to think of God as Santa Claus, where I put out cookies and I get some presents, or where I say a bunch of prayers that I've memorized and I get the job that I wanted, or the house, or even the healing. Matthew's story of the wise men tells us that Jews will not be the only ones to learn about Jesus. For us today, the lesson continues to say that we are not the only ones that God is reaching out to. And the way we experience God is not the only way God reaches out. When you hear that message, that interpretation, it should kind of ring true. Oh, that's the point of the story for me, we would say. A light bulb would go off. That's what the word epiphany means. We refer today as the Epiphany. The day that a light bulb went off and somebody realized what they had heard, what they had seen, they understood what it meant. One of my favorite stories is at the end of the Gospel of Luke, when two disciples are walking along a road to Emmaus, and their hope for Jesus was crushed because he was arrested and he was killed, and that's not what they wanted him to do. And another traveler comes up alongside of them and asks them what's wrong, and then tells them, story by story through the Old Testament, about why this was to happen. And then they get to their end point and they say, come and stay with us. And the stranger sits at table with them and takes bread and breaks it and blesses it and gives it to them. And then they say, oh, this is Jesus. I see it now. He sits with them. He takes the bread, he breaks it, he blesses it, he gives it to them while apparently saying nothing, and then disappears. And they go, oh, now I see, that was Jesus. He was telling us that he had to suffer first. And then he disappeared. The light bulb goes off, and then he's gone. They understood what he was saying after he was gone. And that's what the whole Christian Bible is. What people figured out after Jesus was gone, and how the Jewish Bible filled in that understanding for them, because they looked at their lives in a pattern that was laid out by the Bible. Now, how do those disciples explain that to other people? by telling the story, by telling their story. And we tell it by telling our stories in that same pattern. Our stories fashioned after the Scripture that we listen to, and sometimes we wonder if it was worth our time, and other times we think, oh, I just got it. When the story stops and we say, oh, I just got it. Matthew is talking about gold and frankincense because Isaiah spoke about how the nations would come to us like that. And Jesus is not just the Messiah for the Jews, but for all the other nations that God reaches out to. You could say that to someone and they could say, okay, I'm not sure what that means. Sometimes the story works, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's kind of like crumbs left on a plate on Christmas morning. Two kids will run down, rushing to the tree, and one kid will say, Santa was here. And the other kid looks and says, how do you know that? And they say, look at the plate. There's nothing on the plate. Exactly. Santa came and he ate the cookies. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't make sense to some people. It makes sense to those who've heard the story. Santa's going to come, he's going to drink the milk, he's going to eat the cookies. It doesn't prove anything, an empty plate. It's not supposed to prove anything, but a whole lot of things that we have seen and that we have felt and that we have read suddenly shift and they fall into place and they come together. Like if you take a puzzle and you dump it out on the floor and you see the pieces and you kind of see something that emerges from those pieces. You could sort out the pieces and put it together and show it to somebody and they would say, what's that? And you would say, that's Jesus. And they would say, so what? And we would say, well, he told us that we would see him, and we were wondering what he meant, and then he disappeared. And now I'm supposed to tell you. That's our job. We don't have any way to make that successful, not every time. We don't have any way to get people to see what we've seen or to experience what we've experienced. And we don't have the ability to predict the future or any other magic to prove that we're right. We need to talk about our story, our individual, personal stories in the way the Bible talks about how God works in people's lives. The Bible gives us templates to do that. Examples. Examples where it speaks of healing and crucifixion, of signs and things disappearing, of mistakes and forgiveness, of sinfulness and faithfulness, of dying and being reborn.